so far away and so distant from me. And this is really the message of Tisha B'Av. This is what we've been seeing up until this point in all of the keynotes over here. That it's not just that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us out into Galus, like the Nefesh HaChaim writes, had Klal Yisrael themselves not destroyed the spiritual Beis HaMikdash, it never would have been possible for Titus to come in and destroy it physically. It's only because we did, the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Shvichas Damim, Gil Arayis, and Avodah Zarah. The second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. So you have Klal Yisrael living in Yerushalayim in a time when there's a Beis HaMikdash, when there's Kohanim, Levim, there's Korbanos, there's Shechina, there's Kedusha, and still they're running away from Hashem. And still they are abandoned, it works. And still they are abandoning HaKadosh Baruch Hu's way. So you have Klal Yisrael in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, basically, in the holiest of places, in the holiest of times, and they're entrenched in sin. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says today, Ayeka, where are you? What are you doing? Where are you going? Like Rav is saying, how far could you run away from Hashem? How far could we be from His Torah? How far could we be from His mitzvahs? How far could we be from living a life that is something that is going to find favor in His eyes? We like to look in the mirror and find favor in our eyes. Put on the right clothes, dress ourselves nice, give a good smile. You have to practice a smile sometimes, so when you walk into a room, everybody will notice that smile. We like to find favor in our own eyes. A husband likes to find favor in the eyes of his wife. Doesn't always work, but we try. A husband tries to find favor in the eyes of his wife. A parent will try to find favor in the eyes of their children. Children, b'derech klal, they will try to find favor in the eyes of their parents. You walk into a shul, you'd like to find favor in the eyes of people that are there. You don't want to be known as the guy that nobody wants to sit next to. You'd like to find favor in people's eyes. He's nice, he's quiet, he doesn't make too much noise, he has a good joke every once in a while during the rabbi's drush. He's very good. That's a joke. I see everybody's half asleep already.
It's depressing.
You have to be the simcha to do tshuva. That's it. It doesn't work any other way. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want you to ask yourself, do you think that you are finding favor in my eyes? Do you think that the life that you are leading and living is something that is so redeeming and so valuable that your actions and what you occupy your time with and how you live and how you talk and how you treat people and how you embrace mitzvahs and emunah, is that something that you can be proud of and say, I'm pretty confident that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is pleased with my behavior and my actions. Ayeka asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where are you? Do you know? Are you aruim? Are you naked and exposed? Did you listen to what I said when I said, eat from everything, just don't eat from this eighth, don't eat from that tree over there? Why are you hiding? What are you hiding about all the time? Why are we always, we're not where we're supposed to be, and when we're supposed to be there, why are we there? Ayeka says, I go, where are you? So, it's like when I call somebody, and I don't mean any mussar to anybody when I say this. It's like those days that we have like 8 or 9 people for the minyan. And you pick up the phone and you call somebody, Ayeka, where are you? You need something, Rabbi? Yeah, we're davening. Now? No, tomorrow. I'm just calling to make sure you're coming tomorrow for the minyan. Ayeka, where are you? I'm sure you have a good excuse why you're not here. I'm sure. But you have to ask yourself, is that excuse that I'm not here? Is that an excuse that Hashem will say, yeah, you're right, you shouldn't have been there. you're better off where you were doing whatever you were doing before. It's more important. Tisha B'Av is Eicha, Tisha B'Av is Ayeka. Tisha B'Av is the day that a person begins to ask themselves, where am I holding in Hashem's world? One of the Gedolei Yisrael from the previous generation was Rav Shimon Shkaf. He was one of the biggest Lamdanim, one of the biggest Rosh Yeshivas. He was a giant of Torah. Years after his Petir, after he had passed away, there was a Rav named Rav Yaakov Friedman who went to interview one of the offspring of Rav Shimon Shkaf. And this particular granddaughter of Rav Shimon was a secular kibbutznik living in Eretz Yisrael. She had served on the cabinet in the Israeli government. She had no shayches, no connection at all to Yiddishkeit, kimat nothing. But she was a granddaughter of Shimon Shkaf. So Rabbi Friedman wanted to interview her because she grew up a little bit in his house. He wanted to know, did she have any stories of the great Reb Shimon? So he comes to her house. It's a kibbutz apartment of this woman whose name is Feiga Hindis. Nice name for a kibbutznik. Yeah? Feiga Hindis. And he comes to her, and already, like I said, many, many years, no connection at all to Torah, to mitzvahs, to anything. But her grandfather was this great Reb Shimon Shkaf. As a young girl, Feiga had sat on her grandfather's lap. And after her mother died and her father had remarried, she actually moved into Reb Shimon's home and she stayed with him. So he became like her surrogate father. By the time that she moved into the house, she was already straying from Yiddishkeit. She was a young girl. There was so many winds of Haskalah and everything going on in the world back then. She was already beginning to stray. But her grandfather, the great Reb Shimon, he never once let that get in the way of their relationship. And one time he gave her a present. What was the present that he gave to his granddaughter? He gave her a Hebrew-Russian dictionary. That's what mattered to her. That's what she wanted. So she pulls it off the shelf to show to the interviewer. It's old, it's weathered, pages are yellow. And she opens it up to the front page. And it says with an inscription from her grandfather of Shimon, Lefeiga nechdasi, to Feiga, my granddaughter, Be'avas elamim, with eternal love, Shimon Yehuda HaKayin. And she's caressing this brittle dictionary, and she begins closing her eyes, and she's reminded about what it was like to live in the city of Grodno, to be sitting on her grandfather's lap, to be raised in his house, his Torah, his Kedusha, his Avas Yisrael. She remembered that when he would sit and learn in the house, he would hum a tune, a little niggin while he was learning, whatever that niggin was, and he would be learning. And she said it was the sweetest sound in the world. Eventually, all the learning that he was writing, his Kedushim, his Torah, those became his Svarim later on in life. And at this point in her life, she was an older woman. She retired from the Israeli Knesset, and she had softened quite a bit since her retirement. And she allowed herself some moments of nostalgia over here, remembering the life of Grodno, the life of her grandfather. She also remembered that even though she came from this rabbinic family, at some point she began slipping away. She wanted to follow her dreams of secular Zionism and the other ambitions that she had. And she spoke about all of her dreams. And there were, of course, pictures of Lenin, not John, by the way. And there were pictures of communists. And there was hanging near the bookcase the writings of other apikourses, other heretical writings that were there on the bookcase. But on top of all those books, on the top bookshelf, there was a set of beautiful sets of svarim. Shari Yosher. Shari Yosher is the sefer of Shimon Shkov. Chedushi Rabbi Shimon Yehuda HaKohen. Mereches HaKinyonim in Sefer HaYovel, the svarim that her grandfather wrote. Amidst all of everything that she had lost, those books were sitting prominently displayed on her bookshelf. Fegi was old, and she was blind already at this time. And suddenly, as she's remembering her grandfather, she really begins to cry. Maybe it was the way that Rav Shem reminded her of her grandfather's life. Maybe it was she was leaning close to the Svarim. Who knows what it was, but she was crying. And then suddenly, to absolute surprise of Rabbi Friedman, she says to him the following words. She says, I see how important my grandfather's Svarim are for Klal Yisrael. I would like to help facilitate the printing of more of those Svarim so people could learn them. Ayeka Fege Hindis, where are you? In those moments of truth, we remind ourselves who we really are. Tisha B'Av itself is the day of emes, the day of truth. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is blasting the question all day long. Ayeka, Ayeka, Ayeka. Are we close or are we far? We living right? We living wrong? We on the derech hayashar, the straight path, or the derech ha'akum? Akum, are we on the crooked path over there? Which way are we? If we think and we stop and we recalculate our direction, then Be'ez Hashem, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks us, Ayeka, where are you? We'll be able to say, Hineni HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here I am. Hina Yud Daled. Tova many ligos the shayu Hashem, Hashechagim Yimtoch. Shadi Ramaz Yisar Estayu, Mila B'Yis Avis, Shacharis Giyeh, Magid Rishid Onu v'chori v'voni b'acharis v'mechachivi, Gagalasay acharis. Acharis yishayin cheshech yidu midah, v'kamanim chazon yidu. Al Rashid Arais nitzutzoyin, Adad lo yasoyin, v'lezon gadol. Adad levan chimas yatzoy, yatzir, tzazeh seget. Nemutza gamim, ro'inech latzah. Even if I'm not going to say, I'm not thinking you this way, sorry, The hour is getting late, so we're going to skip now to two more keynotes that we're going to do together. The very important keynote, which is a message that we speak about not only today, but we speak about it on Yom Kippur as well. Keynote Chaf Aleph 21, Azeh Levanon. This is referring to the Harugi Malchus. This is referring to the 10 martyrs that died for the sins of Klal Yisrael. Not exactly all at the same time, but somewhere around times that was similar by the Chorban. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky brings down in his Sefer about Tisha B'Av from the famous Midrash that tells us that there was a who read the Torah, and he learned over there that if somebody kidnaps and sells another Jew, so they should be put to death. And he goes further into the Torah and he sees that it says that there was once a story of a man by the name of Yosef HaTzadik. He was kidnapped by his brothers, thrown into a pit, and he was sold off into Mitzrayim. And what do we find over there? The brothers, although they were forgiven by Yosef, we don't see any retribution that ever took place. So Chaim Kanievsky explains over here that it's true that Yosef HaTzadik forgave his brothers for all of the pain and the anguish that they caused him. Although, as Yosef himself said, it's from you. Me'alakim, it's from Hashem. Don't worry about it. You're part of Hashem's master plan. However, since that they intended to do him harm, even if Yosef forgave them, he wants to learn in a very diktuk hadin, in a very strict way, their sins still had to be atoned for. And so this Roman emperor sees it as his mission to bring a midah keneged midah, a measure for measure to Klal Yisrael, that the 10 people who represent the 10 brothers that kidnapped Yosef, they should die. And amongst, of course, we know that amongst them were the greatest of sages of the entire time of that generation and those generations. And each one would be in place of one of the Shvatim, one of the tribes. And they were killed in horrific and horrible ways, each and every one of them. And the stories go on more and more and more. The combing of the flesh, the burning of the Sefer Torah around them, the decapitation, all the different things which took place. And Rabbi Yishmael, who was one of the martyrs that was going to be taken. The Midrash tells us that he asked to Gabriel, the Malach, the angel, and he said, why? Why do 10 of us have to die over here? These are talking about you're trying to bring somebody who's going to restitute the Shvatim, the tribes. Why the 10 of us? So Gabriel says, by your life, Yishmael, I heard from Me'achar Pargut, from behind the heavenly partition, that the 10 sages of Klal Yisrael are going to be killed. So he asked why. So Gabriel said, because of the brothers who sold Yosef. And he said, that since that every single word in the Torah is not for naught, which means it says in the Torah that you can never kidnap and get away with it. So, okay, I understand. There has to be a punishment. But are you telling me that up and from the times of Yosef HaTzadik until this time, you never could find 10 people to kill? So Gabriel answers, he says, Chayecha Yishma, by your life. Since the day of the Shvatim, since the day that they sold Yosef, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has never found a generation with 10 tzaddikim like you, and as saintly as the Shvatim, that are going to be able to stand in their place, measure for measure, and they're going to be taken from the world. And therefore you have no choice. The 10 of you will be the Harugi Malchus, you will be the 10 martyrs that will die for the sins of the brothers. And of course it's noted in the commentators as well that this is the act of the brothers was nothing less than sinas chinam to the maximum degree. They were bothered by Yosef HaTzadik because of his dreams. They were bothered by his prestige. They were bothered by the fact that he was chosen min hashamayim to be the leader that he was. And so they decided to destroy themselves by allowing sinas chinam to well up inside of them. And therefore on this very sad day of Tisha B'Av, where we are still mourning the losses of the second Beis HaMikdash, which was because of sinas chinam, like the Gemara says, the first one was destroyed because of the 3 cardinal sins. The second one was destroyed because of sinas chinam. Ask the Gemara, which one is worse? I mean, it's pasha, which one is worse? Killing and having illicit relations and bowing down to idols must be much worse than sinas chinam. And yet the Gemara says, sinas chinam is worse. What's my proof? The first Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt. The second one is still lying in ruins. And if we live in a world where there is no Beis HaMikdash, like the Gemara in Shalmi says that every generation that the Beis HaMikdash is not built in again, it's Ke'ilu Nechav, we are responsible for the destruction of it. That means that we have not yet done the job of eradicating the sinas chinam from this world. So as we go into this kina, we have to remind ourselves it's the loss of Torah. That's also part of the terrible tragedy over here. The 10 of the greatest sages of Klal Yisrael. We're talking about Tanoim. We're not talking about simple people. The 10 Tanoim of Klal Yisrael who are lost. That's the loss of all of their Torah. One of the things that came from the stories in Meron, which took place this past year, is that it seems that there wasn't a simple person who ended up having their lives taken at Meron. Each one of those, either whether they were children or they were adults, each and every one of them was holding somewhere very special in the world of Torah. Whether it was the young boy who had reviewed Masech the Sukkah 90 times. No, we're learning Sukkah right now for Daf Yomi. We learn it in half an hour a day, 40 minutes a day. You're probably not going to review it until the next cycle. This man, this was a boy, I think he was like 12 years old, 13 years old. He reviewed the entire Masechta 90 times in his life. One of someone that we are friendly, some of us are friendly with, Rav Yankel Berenfeld from Lakewood, New Jersey, has a brother-in-law who is nifter in Meron. His brother-in-law's name is Reb Shmuel Tzvi Klagsbad. He was a tzaddik Yisod Olam. At a young age, he decided to commit himself to learning and learning and learning. They said in his yeshiva, he was learning full-time still. He's kind of a large family, he was still learning full-time. He learned 10 hours basically straight every day, 2 5-hour intervals. But the people in his kollel said, what were his 2 5-hour intervals? 5 hours straight. He learned in the morning for 5 hours straight, no breaks, no coffee. Didn't have to check his nothing. He just sat and he learned 5 hours straight. Then it was lunchtime. He would learn for another 5 hours. At 4 hours and 15 minutes, he would stop into the second 5 hours and he would take a little drink of water. And they said he had a whole cheshbon about that one drink of water. So basically, 10 hours children at home who's living a life of total Tisha, that's no longer in the world. Those 10, and then he learned at night again, of course. Those 10, 12, 14 hours of continuous learning doesn't exist. That means that those of us that are left in this world, we have obligations to try to fill up the gaps that are there and restore the Torah to Klal Yisrael. So as we read this Chaf Aleph over here, number 21, we keep in mind the loss of the Gedolei Yisrael, of the previous generations, the Tanoim, the loss of the Gedolim, how many people's Chashav and Tzadikim were lost during COVID, and how many were lost in Meron and throughout. And Hashem should heal our pain. So the Zoche Zag, the Barachem Basi Zag, the Kaidesh, the Relim Didoshim, the Seven Misach Amuro, Yavadu Goyom, Yisham Acheret Amuro, Kibon Goyom, Rabban Shimon Bashad, the Lord, the Chol, the Zog, the Zayda, the Rabban Shimon Chad, the Zog, the Gosh, the Zino, the Zag, the Zog, Oh, no, no, he's by the I can hold him as I can as Mizarre Masrei, Shabazali, Shablo, the person is also the Echon, the Chomine Taro, the over the Mihuda Chano, even the Shibane, Nazaro, the Ran Ben Shidim Shalabi, Moki Mechasim Lachtam Lahoro, the Khalid Ben Anjo, Lachab Magim, Yoshe Midol is in the Noimo, before the Khalid my Lord, so Sebuli Yadami Nicho, Ami Boje, Yomos Miro, Chazim Ben Yesheva, Mazubia, Zankur Bashlichu, Yodzu Maskara Nom Shloimiach Midras Meshem Shalom Achel Adam Bichutz Pis Yoyom Loi Habolei Rama Tzadi Yom Yelozim Yishamon Yachanam Yom Yeloshavim Yizman Kibili Chabein Yigo Cheresh Lo'u Yichuchu B'chaim L'Gamno Yodzu Mishmazon L'Gamno Yotze B'zot Zimon Ha'inu V'Hinu Zimnei Yalon Anoz V'Gono V'Yizkim Azri B'Hereg V'Cheneg V'Yichon Shalom V'Yisez Mimeno Yichlo Yosef V'Zuro Chadeh V'Nubot Ashoy V'Avimo V'Avoye V'Avilo Yidu Adonai Lo Yezilo V'Siyaso Yidu Gai V'Zlois Chedeg Yaakov V'Mashiach V'Yezano We're going to skip now to those of you that have one of the more updated versions of the Kinos. There were two kinos that were written to commemorate the atrocities of the Holocaust, which is probably for us is the most recent tragedy of Klal Yisrael, which took place already which took place 70 years ago. And there's a very interesting question that Rabbi Gladstein brings down in his sefer here on Tisha B'Av, that we don't find kinos written for all the tragedies that ever transpired in Klal Yisrael. We find for the Chorban, we find for certain parts of the Crusades, but we don't find, there were many, many pogroms which took place over the years. There was a lot of mass destruction that the Goyim did against us all of the time. And we don't find that every single episode that we traversed is commemorated in the kinos. And he says perhaps the one that is glaring, which is missing the most, is the Girush Safarad, which is the Spanish Inquisition. This was by far one of the most devastating blows to Klal Yisrael. It was certainly caused mass murders of hundreds of thousands of Jews. We were expelled from the nation. We had to go into traveling in Golis. Many people died along the way. So it was the end of an era of the, I don't know if you call it some kind of a glory of Klal Yisrael with some of the greatest of halachic minds that were there. And it was all destroyed. And yet in the kinos, we don't mention it even once. It's silent. So he brings down three very beautiful ideas over here to explain why it is that we don't talk about it. And his answer is basically a historical fact. When the Yidden were leaving Spain on that fateful day of Tisha B'Av 1492, the Chachamim of that generation ordered and decreed that they should leave Spain with musical accompaniment. Even though that it was Tisha B'Av and we don't play music, nevertheless they ordered that there should be, orchestras out there along the way, and as the Yidden were going into the exile for the last leaving Spain behind, they should go in there, they should go out, and there should be music that is playing. So he says, what's the pshat? Makes no sense for Tisha B'Av at all. So he says three reasons. Number one is because the Rabbanim sought to boost the spirits of the exiled. They were forced to abandon their homes. They were going into Gullus. They wanted to encourage them and infuse them with bitachon and faith. Things are going to be okay. Everybody knows music puts a person in the mood. And therefore, instead of going with all the screeching and the screams and the cries and the wailing and the goyim that were plundering them and pummeling them, they left amongst song. So they had hope for the future. Secondly, he says, it was a way for them to express their gratitude to Hashem. Because every single Jew that chose to leave means that they withheld the challenge and the nisayon of not converting to Christianity. And therefore, the 300,000 Jews who were exiled from Spain, they left amongst the song because they were celebrating the fact that although there was so much pressure and many of our other brothers and sisters, they succumbed to it. But we were strong enough to follow in the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're going straight. But the last thing he brings over here is from it could be the Sefer Todah, that's the Sefer Leo Kitov, yeah? He writes over here that there was another reason that they were playing music as they were leaving. And he says because the Chachamim of that generation wanted to teach Klal Yisrael a very important lesson. And the lesson is that when you leave Gullus, because Spain itself was a very strong Gullus for the Jewish people, you never cry. You only cry when you're being exiled from Yerushalayim HaKodesh. And for that, they played the music to let them understand it is sad, and it is going to be tragic, and it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. We know that. But the fact that you are getting out of that place, which you might have thought was so good for you, and you had prestige, and you had power, and you had nobility, and you had your schooling, and you had your houses, and you had your money and everything, you should know that anywhere that you are in Golis, the more that you thrive, the worse the Golis is for you. And therefore, instead of crying as you are leaving, you should actually be rejoicing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is getting you out of a place that is so antithetical to a Yiddish neshama. So, with that, we have to ask ourselves, what? Yes.
Does anybody suggest that it's like the two Kruvim facing one another?
Oh, I don't know. He does. It could be that they do. He doesn't bring it down. Could be. It'd be a very nice idea. Nice idea. So the perhaps we could say then that by the Holocaust, why it is that they were so adamant to put into the Baba Rebbe and Rav Shimon Schwab both wrote Kinos over here. It's not really the end of a Gullus. It was total mass destruction of Klal Yisrael and the mass destruction of an era. And people did eventually leave, but it was a long time coming before they got out and they rebuilt and they changed again. So the kinos we have of the Holocaust himself is not a stira to the fact that we are sad that we are left gullus. It's a recognition of the 6 million Jews who perished in the war, and a recognition of the loss of generations and generations and generations of life that existed during that time. So I just want to leave off with one idea just to show the tenacity of the Jews that survived the war. Just to understand the koiches, the superhuman strength that they had. Rabbi Gladstein had a grandfather whose name I believe was Rav Mordechai Gladstein. He was a Talmid Chacham, he was a tzaddik, he was very well versed in many things, and he was one of the last remaining Jews after the camps and the Allied forces were coming in. So the Nazis basically had two choices. Either they pick up their stuff and they go fight against the Allied forces and try to defend themselves, or they just decimate every last Jew that they could possibly get their hands on and eradicate them from the world before the time is too late. And the Nazis, as you know, they chose the latter. They decided in those final days before the Allied forces would come in, they would extinguish as many Jewish lives as they possibly could. So in this particular story over here, his father was rounded up from the concentration camps, and they threw them onto a cattle car. They shoved 100 people into each car. They were stuck together like this, he says. There was no place to move. There was no place to go. I will save you the details of the days that they traveled with only one little tiny window without barely any air that was coming in. There was no bathrooms in there. It was a horrific experience. People were falling left and right. Suddenly they hear explosions on the outside. And they feel the train is shaking and booming. And they're trying to look out this one little window they have, and before they know it, they hear walking across the roof of the train, and the doors open up, and lo and behold, they are met not by the Nazis, they're met by the Allied forces. And the American soldiers have come in, and they are liberating these prisoners from the cattle cars, and the Nazis, these Rishoyim, they quickly took clothing from the prisoners, and they tried to put the clothing on so they would look like they were Jews as well. But the army they were not dummies, and they saw that the Jews were skeletons, and these fat Nazis who've been eating throughout the entire war were busting out of their uniforms. So Rabbi Mordechai Gladstein is standing there, and one of his enemies is standing in front of him. And the American soldier, one of the commanders comes over to him, and he hands him his gun, and he says to him, "Take revenge on your enemies." It's a pretty good deal. You've been tortured for 4 years. People have been destroying your life. They killed your family. They killed your children. There's nothing left. The soldier puts a gun in your hand. He's holding the Nazi in front of you, and he says, "Go and take revenge on your enemy." And without skipping a beat, he turns to the commander and he says, revenge is for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not for me to take. I haven't learned a Gemara in 3 years. The last Gemara that I was learning was Bava Mitzia. To have my hands on a Bava Mitzia and to be able to learn again, that will be my freedom. And that will be my revenge against the Nazis. I'll leave the rest of the revenge up to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So with those thoughts in mind of the heroes of Amunah and faith, we'll read this last one. You can pick either the one by the Baba Rebbe or the one by Shimon Schwab. And then we'll conclude the services after that. It's after you have an art school? It's after 43, after 44. It's 384, 385.
In the art scroll, the Baba Rebbe is on 384 and Schwab is on 386.
Thank you. כל שרם יזכר דמי לבני שכם יוינים, ורם שמה יזרם עזו נפשם מעדיני הבאים. ושישיב עזו תלמידיהם, אמן ינך שמה, אביהו מילים גושים. נוגו מירום דמי ילדים, מקים צועקים בידיך מן האדמות. לכל נגמר תבנושים ולא יצלחיה, ונשמע שיבות הרבה מדרשוי, זבתי נסיעוי. יבואי ביתיים אברנדה, נקיימי משיעוי, שחומי מתבשיה. סיסו ואיננו סביוי, זה שגרי ומביאה, זמרי ויודים ובאים במביאויס. סגו שמיים אדומו, אבי היולויס מבזי זוילום. סוי זירו בו, גיבוי סעד לחמי ובנות בסוילום. צדיקים זקנים וחסידים דבקי אמונות, דוידות ויעל גדים ויעזנו, ויבזק יוי וידו. אחי משה ויסנו, אבנה משמיים, ומחנה לקדושים בים, איזה יעשי מצרים וימי בייס גדשי ומחנה לברואים, ומיד רבים וציון משומות. We come now to the final of somewhat of the final, but the one that we're going to say responsibly together, which is Eli Tzion, which is that the Yerushalayim itself is wailing, the wails of Yerushalayim, the crying of Yerushalayim over here. And it's, as it says over here, like a woman who is suffering through childbirth. And as we know that the days before Mashiach come is called the Chevle HaMashiach. It's the birth pangs of Mashiach. It's the time that the birth itself is getting very closer. And the Vilna Gaon says that the closer that we get to the birth, the closer that a mother gets to the birth, that's the more intensity of the pains themselves of the labor. And so as the time goes on and the Golus continues to linger and we see so many incredible and difficult things to understand happening all around us, and the tsaras are getting worse, and the sicknesses are getting worse, and the poverty is getting worse, and the challenges and ruchnias are getting worse than we've ever seen before. That's just a sign that we're getting so close to the actual birth of Mashiach Tzidkenu. So we're going to rise now, and we're going to say this one responsibly, and then after that we'll conclude the kinos.